Hi there and welcome to another Raid Shadow Legends video. I'm IceMan and today we are continuing our HP Heroes series. Not much of a series, it's probably going to be about another part after this one, I'd imagine, but it depends on length. Yeah, we finished off with the Sacred Order and next we pick up with the Barbarians. Let's get on, shall we? We're moving on to the Barbarians. And first up we have Ahsoka Warcaller. Big lady herself. Interesting aesthetic about her. This girl attacks one enemy, has a 45% chance of placing block cooldown skills. Debuff for 1 turn. Damage is based off of HP again. The debuff chance goes up to 60%. For an A1 that's pretty solid. The A2, barrel through, attacks all enemies. Places a 30% decreased crit damage debuff and a 50% decreased attack debuff for 2 turns on target whose attack is higher than their defense. So attack based champions are going out there and doing damage. She actually brings their damage right down. Decreases the crit, decreases the attack. Then she's got places a 30% decreased speed debuff and a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns on targets whose attack is equal to or lower than their defense. So she basically has a bit in her kit. If you're an attack based champion, she's going to debuff you. If you're a defense based champion, she's going to debuff you. HP champions, on the other hand, are actually going to be pretty solid here and still do some decent damage because they're not going to get affected by either of these. Well, they are going to get affected by one or the other, to be fair, but the decreased attack and the decreased defense aren't going to matter that much to them. It's not going to lower their damage and it's not going to lower their support that much. They will get affected either by the decreased speed or the decreased crit damage, which will affect them somewhat, but certainly not as much as the other 2 types. Bottoms up places a 50% ally protection buff on all allies except for this champion for 3 turns, places a 50% strengthen buff on this champion for 3 turns. That was a mouthful. Brilliant ability though. Like I say, she's a very solid support. She decreases what the enemy does, buffs up your team, and then she's got a passive, a really cool passive as well. Golden Guard decreases the damage of all allies received from critical hits by 30%. This champion will receive that damage instead, so she's basically just going to absorb critical damage hits to herself, keeping your team alive. Absolutely brilliant. The aura increases ally HP in all battles by 33%. Again, a good solid aura. And a very solid champion there. Next up we have Jotun. This guy was a meme for a very long time. The big beefy wet noodle. If you can have a beefy wet noodle. But, you know, he got himself a buff not that long ago. And I think he does have a place in the game these days. He hits okay, hits pretty decent. Apparently his AI is a bit messed up, or was a bit messed up. Whether or not he still is, I don't know, but you can still always manual with him. He's got a decreased defense, only a 30% decreased defense for 2 turns on his A1. Again, I think they should have buffed that up to a 60% decreased defense. Most epics have that these days. There's even rares out there to do it, so you know there's no reason for a guy like him to not have it. It wouldn't break him to change that and just put it up to 60%. It'd just make him a bit more usable by people. His A2 attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance, this is 100 by the way when booked, chance of placing a HP burn debuff for 4 turns, and it's on a 4 turn cooldown. So effectively you can actually keep, in fact it's on a 3 turn cooldown if you put all the books into it, although why you'd want to, since the only thing it does is HP burn for 4 turns on a 4 turn cooldown. I'd personally maybe book up to there to get the debuff chance up to 100, and I wouldn't bother with another one. Obviously you don't get to choose where the books go, it's random luck, but if you've already got the books where you want them elsewhere, I wouldn't then go put another one in for that. I don't see any reason to. This guy, because of this one ability, can be quite useful I think in Sorath, the Frost Spider. She's got to have HP burn on her to die, otherwise she just revives herself. And getting it consistently and keeping it on her can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. You've got champions like Elder Skarg, but he needs to remove buffs to put it on. And if she hasn't got buffs or debuffs, if she hasn't got the buffs or debuffs up to remove, he can't put it out there, and that's an issue I found, so I've swapped in other champions to do it. He's even the champion I would usually use for Spider. Ultimate Gaelic, again, he's a pretty decent champion. He does do AoE HP burn, but again, you've got to have the increase attack up at the right time, and the champion's alive, and so there are these caveats that need to be hit. Whereas this guy, no caveats at all. He's got the ability, if you're manualing it, certainly in particular, or you just click on the spider so that he targets her, HP burn on the spider is not going to be an issue with this guy. So, a decent solid champion. Does his damage off of HP, so he's going to be a bit harder to kill. And he does some pretty decent damage to boot. Did we miss out his other one? Yeah, attacks one enemy, decreases the target's max HP by 30% of the damage inflicted. Damage increases by 50% if the target's under HP burn debuff. So again, he's also pretty solid on the Scarab King. So there's two bosses there that you can use this guy for in the Doom Tower. Decreased target's max HP is one of the things you actually need on the Scarab King to make him easier to kill. You can increase the damage on this if he's under a HP burn, so you can put that HP burn out there and it will do that. I can't remember with the Scarab King if he's got a thing against HP burn. He might do, I'd have to look that one up. So I may be telling you wrong, he might not be viable for the Scarab King for that reason, but it's worth looking into. In fact, we're just going to pause there and go check it out ourselves. Yeah, so I've actually done the research myself, and it turns out that unless it's been updated from the information I can find, he doesn't do anything against people with HP burn. I'm probably thinking of one of the other bosses that has that built into their kit. So this guy is going to be pretty solid for Sorath and for the Scarab King. So yeah, definitely a champion well worth looking at. I don't have him, as you can see. He's one of the few Barbarian epics that I don't have. Also that new Farrakin, the Fat or whatever he is, I don't have him either. But old school, I still don't have Jotun. I've never picked him up, so you know, on either of my accounts I don't think. Next up we actually have another one here, Baroth the Blood-Soaked. Interesting looking champ. As you can see, very ornate, sort of cool barbarian armour. A bit more ornate than most of them, although you know, you look at Usurga, hers is kind of ornate these days. Blood all over his axes, blood all over his skin, hence his red. And you know, hence the name, Blood-Soaked. But yeah, pretty cool looking champion. We've got Gilded Weapons, attacks one enemy 2 times. The first hit has a 20% chance of filling this champion's turn meter by 10%. The second hit has a 20% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 10%. The debuff chance can be increased by 10%, so that's pretty solid for an A1. 2 hits, filling your turn meter, his turn meter at least, not the whole team's, and a chance of decreasing the target's turn meter. Pretty solid. I like that for an A1. It's really usable, I think. Splattering Hacks, attacks one enemy 2 times. Again, he's got 2 hitters, so he's quite viable for the Fire Knight, I think. Attacks one enemy 2 times. The first hit places a shield equal to 25% of the damage inflicted on all allies for 2 turns. The second hit heals all allies by 10% of the damage inflicted. The ability sounds really cool, but from what I gather, it's a bit meh. It's on a 4-turn cooldown, can be booked down to 3. Obviously, you can increase the damage, and you would do if you get the cooldown down. The only problem is, if you're on waves, or say in the arena, somewhere like that, and he's hitting multiple... again, it attacks one enemy 2 times, sorry, so it's not even an AoE. If this was an AoE, and he's doing that much extra damage, this shield would actually be decent. Because it's a single target, he doesn't do enough damage to actually get a solid shield. The heals by 10% of the damage inflicted, again, it's okay, but it's negligible. So the idea of the ability is good, but I think it needs to be an AoE. and B, maybe you need to kind of bump up the numbers here a little bit, and then he'd be really viable and really decent. As it stands, he's not actually that great a champion, hence why, you know, 4 months or so after he's come out, nobody is talking about this guy. You look this guy up, there's no videos out there on him, nobody's discussing him anywhere. He's just not good enough, and you know, it's a real shame, to be fair, because they're bringing out some really decent champions here. He is one I feel that is maybe in need of a buff. He's A3, Serpent Axes, attacks one enemy 2 times. Again, a free. He's basically got 2 hitters on each ability, so he is good for the Fire Knight, I'll give you that. First hit has a 75%, 100% chance when booked, replacing a 50% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns, and a 100% chance of removing any increased attack buffs from the target, again when booked that is. The second hit has a 100% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns, and removing any increased defense debuffs from the, increased buffs. Now I'm going to get this out right in a minute, I swear I will. Chance of removing any increased defense buffs from the target. So again, it's a pretty solid ability, that one, but make it an AoE. You make that an AoE and he's actually a really decent, viable champion. It doesn't have to be a hard hitter. You could be using it for the utility of putting the debuffs out there and taking buffs off without it being such a big hitter, and that would actually make him fairly decent and viable. But as it stands, he is a bit weak sauce, unfortunately. Woad Painted, unfortunately, we're not even going to talk about her. She's just crap. She's just, there's nothing else to say. She is one of the worst champions in the game. We are not even going to look at her again. If you're interested in her, if you've never, you're new to the game, go take a look at her if you want, but she is not worth it. She's just not worth your time. So that's it for the Barbarians. We're moving on to the Ogryn Tribes. We're clicking along here. Bit of a long video again. Unfortunately, it's a lot to go through. Maybe I should have done 3-parters, but you know, in hindsight and all that. We've got one of the newer champions of the game, Clob Beast Feeder. I don't have this guy. Attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of placing a 30% decreased crit rate debuff for 2 turns. That's a pretty solid A1, and this can be booked up to 50% chance. Then we've got Get Behind Me, places a shield buff on all allies equal to 20% of this champion's max HP for 2 turns. Again, it's a solid A2, can be booked down to 3 turns. Again, it's going to help you out in really any content, but definitely viable for the Scarab King, where you've got to have that shield up. The A1's not going to be as useful there, so you know, it's not necessarily his best place, don't get me wrong, but if you need a shield champion and you've got him, he can be used for that. His A3, Beast Escape, places a 30% increased speed buff and a 50% increased accuracy buff on all allies for 2 turns. Again, I feel this is actually very viable for Doom Tower. It can be booked from 5 to 3 turns and takes a couple of books, this ability, which is quite nice. You're going to increase your accuracy, therefore making it easier for you to hit the high accuracy requirements of the Doom Tower, and you're going to increase your speed on all allies, helping them move faster and get through content. It's a really solid ability. These two there are really good, and I feel that is a decent kit. His passive, Delicious Giblets, whatever that is, heals the ally with the lowest HP by 10% of their max HP at the start of this champion's turn. I like the passive. I just feel that should be heals by 10% of his max HP. He's the one you're building out with high HP. He's the one that can do some solid heals if you do that. And I find it really annoying when they take a HP based champion that you've built high HP on and then swap it around so that you're actually doing stuff based off of your allies' HP, who probably wasn't built with high HP, unless you've got other HP based champions on the team. Now, there's not a lot of people in this faction that we're going to be talking about, so we'll be moving right along. This guy, I'd actually forgotten all about him and that I've got him, and I actually want to build this guy up for Faction Wars. I think he's a really solid champion. He is a void, but he is only a rare. Gear Grinder, attacks one enemy, places a 7.5% continuous heal buff on this champion for 1 turn if the attack is critical. So you build him out for full crit, and he's going to be putting out 7.5 continuous heal on himself every time he hits with his A1. That is a really solid A1, to be fair, to help keep him up. Then his A2 And although it takes a lot of books, 6 books, it is a solid set of books. It's on a 5-turn cooldown, can be booked down to 3, so that's useful. And he heals all allies by 15% of their max HP. Again, why their max HP? That is stupid. Swap that to his max HP and you've got a really solid champion there. The heal can be increased by 20%, so you can actually get that up to 35%. It'd still be better based off of his HP. It's a solid, decent heal. It's a good A2. The A1 is good, the A2 is good. The A3 revives a single dead ally with 50% HP and 50% turn meter on a 5-turn cooldown. I don't think there's any other revivers in this faction, so that is actually really solid and going to help you out in faction wars. I'm not saying he's the most best champion out there. He's not one you're going to build up for other areas of the game necessarily, but he will help you in faction wars and he will help you in Ogryn faction only room in the Doom Tower if it comes up. So for that alone, I'd say he's at least worth building up for that. Good solid champion, a good addition to the game. Alright, we're going to skip straight past the Lizzardmen because they're another faction. In fact, it's weird, you've got 2 in a row that basically at this stage there's none. So we're going to finish off with the Skinwalkers for this video, and in part 2 we'll cover the rest of the factions. We've got Hakorn Smashlord. This guy's a beast of a champ. He hits pretty solidly hard. I hate going up against this guy. It really does my nutting. Attacks one enemy, has a 40% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. Alright, it's only a single target, but again it's a pretty solid thing. And you can book this up to 55% chance of stunning. Rallying Bellow is A2, removes all debuffs from all allies, so nice debuff strip. Then places a block debuffs buff on all allies for 2 turns. Heals all allies by 15% of this champion's max HP. Exactly the way it should be with a max HP champion. Heals each ally by an extra 10% of this champion's max HP for each debuff removed from them. And you can also book up the heal by another 20%. So this extra heal on its own can be 30%. The first heal can be 45% of this champion's max HP, plus 30% of his max HP for each debuff removed. This can just basically heal people to full. It's a great heal. Really solid support. Blood Offering sacrifices HP equal to 25% of this champion's max HP, then attacks all enemies. Damage inflicted is equal to 50% of this champion's max HP. This attack is always a normal hit. The HP sacrifice will happen even if it kills his champion. By all accounts, this can be a pretty solid hit. It's a good AoE that does a lot of damage. Obviously you just want to make sure that if you're using it, he's at high HP when you do, because he's going to lose a load of HP and you don't want to kill him. It can be booked down at 4-turn cooldown. He's got an aura that increases ally HP in dungeons by 33%. Again, a very good solid champion. Next up we have Coronar, a very cool champion, very interesting looking champion. I gather he was one of the Valentine's champions that came out at some stage. He's paired with Manaya. His A1, Flourish of Slaughter, attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of decreasing each target's turn meter by 5%. That's not huge, but it is still really annoying and a good opener, and it's a nice solid AoE for an opener. Attacks all enemies 2 times instead, if 1 instead of 1, and the chance... So he attacks all enemies 2 times instead of 1, and the chance of it decreasing the target's turn meter increases to 100% if Manaya is on the same team. The damage of each hit will be decreased by 50%. So, you know, it's a very solid ability based off of HP. His A2, Beastly Bellow, has a 75% chance, 100 when booked, of placing a provoke debuff on all enemies for 1 turn. 100% provoke is always really useful in the arena and various other parts of the game, especially now. Doom Tower places a block debuffs buff and a 60% increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns. Removes all debuffs from this champion before placing the block debuffs. and increased defense buffs if Monea's on the same team. Personally, I actually think he wouldn't be broken if this actually placed these buffs on everybody rather than just himself. But he's a pretty solid champion. He hits reasonably hard, and he does some work in the places you use him. The buff chance can be 100%, as we said. The cooldown can be on 3. I mean, to be fair, that's the change I would maybe make. I would make this, the buffs go on everybody, but have it on a 5 or 6 turn cooldown to start, and then have the cooldown reduced by 1 by the book. But it being an AoE buff, and then that's just that little bit better. And makes him a bit more supportive of the whole team. His A3, Battle Waltz, attacks all enemies, places a 50% decrease attack debuff on all enemies for 2 turns, places a 60% decreased defense debuff on targets under decreased attack debuffs. Okay. I'm not sure if that means in 1 turn, so you basically need to roll around again, or they already need to be under increase attack, decrease attack. He's placing decrease attack. If that takes effect first, then this would automatically take effect as well. I'm guessing it's not. It seems a bit odd. I don't know how it works. I don't have the champion, so I can't say. Again, it's an AoE. He does some pretty decent damage. He's got a passive here, counterattacks when hit by enemies under decreased attack, decreased defense, or decreased speed debuffs. Always counterattacks when hit if Manoa is on the same team. So he's got this built-in counterattack, which is pretty solid. And don't forget that his A1 is an AoE, so you know his counterattack can be pretty damaging. Then his other passive places 60% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns if this champion kills an enemy. I suppose actually with that being in the kit, you don't necessarily need him buffing people there. But again, I'd maybe remove that passive and just make that an AoE for a change, and like I say, increase the cooldown a little bit. But all in all, really solid champion, well worth looking at. Next up, we have somebody I never thought I'd put in the list. I've not really used this guy. I don't like him. I think I might have tried building him up a little bit to 40 or something, tried him in some content at some point, but I didn't find him all that useful. But he's got an okay kit. We're going to go through it. Attacks one enemy 2 times each hit, has a 20% chance of stealing 1 random buff. It's okay, it's not big. His A2 attacks 1 enemy, ignores the target's defense if they have no active buff, and steals 2 random buffs from the target. He is good at stealing buffs, that's what I will say. And if you're early on in the game, you've just come into the game and you pull him and you've not got a huge pool of epics, he can do some work for you stealing buffs in the arena, if nothing else. His passive has a 30% chance of stealing 1 random buff from the attacker when hit. Occurs once per hit, counterattacks the attacker if they have no active buffs. So this is pretty cool. I do like this. He's got a built-in counterattack if they don't have any buffs. If not, he's got a good chance, 50% chance of stealing a random buff every time he's hit. He's actually quite... I'd look at putting somebody like him in, say, a provoke set, getting more provokes, getting people coming to him and hitting him. I don't know about building him out for attack, building him out for HP, because obviously HP champions tend to be targeted less. So that's the rub there. But then you put him in a provoke and build him with high HP, he's going to take the hit, and he's going to do some counter attack, and he's going to be removing stuff. He does have a fairly decent aura of increased ally accuracy in all battles by 40. Again, very useful in the Doom Tower these days. So he's not a top tier champion in my books, but there are places in the game where you can use him if you do not have better. Right, so that's it for this video. You may have noticed I'm swapping shirts halfway at the start and the end. It's purely because originally this was one long video and it was just way too long, so I had to cut it in half. So that meant filming a new intro and a new outro, and hence the shirt change. Because yes, I do change my shirt on a daily basis, as everybody should. But anyway, so yeah, we've done the Skinwalkers. You know, we started off with the Barbarians. Again, I've said it each one, but obviously these champions can really help you get through content They bring a lot to the table. It's well worth looking at them all. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.